Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. Joining me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now a galaxy far, far away, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
We have just come back from WonderCon 2023 in Anaheim, California. Second time that we've been since the pandemic, so we appear to be in full force again. I would say that this particular convention was getting back to the old ways of the convention. It didn't quite feel so empty and small as it did last year. I'm going to ask you what you thought of that here in a moment. But first, I feel like you and I have a little bit of an announcement to make for our listeners.
Our unannouncement.
Our unannouncement.
Our announcement.
Our announcement to make. Over on Discord, we gave our listeners an opportunity to vote on a handful. I think we had like 9 different options for what we're going to record next, because we've only got 2 episodes of Star Wars left before we have hit the end of the movies. And so we gave them a number of titles from which to choose. And those titles have now been dwindled down to 3. We've got a top 3. Drea, how do you feel about these top 3?
Oh, I am super excited about the top 3.
Yeah.
I was a little bit nervous about what would make it to the top.
And you're happy with the ones that
voting. Oh, I'm totally excited.
Oh.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. So we are going to tell you, the listeners, now those top 3. And then we are going to invite you to join our Patreon so that you can vote on what we cover next. Drea, do you remember what the first of the 3 is?
I do indeed. It is the Mandalorian. No, I'm kidding. It's not the Mandalorian.
No.
It's the first 6 original Star Trek films.
Correct. So we're talking Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Sulu.
I'm going to admit,
Chekhov,
this is
Uhura,
not this isn't the Star Trek
that you know and
that
love.
I've followed and watched. No, I'm more of a next gen kind of girl. So it'll be a new adventure for me. I've seen Wrath of Khan. I've seen the one after Search for Spock, I think it's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen...
You've seen Voyage Home.
I've seen The Whales.
Voyage Home. That's
so,
4. Yeah.
Yeah, I've probably seen the majority of the first 6 movies, but...
You've probably also seen Final Frontier. That's the one where they go looking for God and, spoiler alert, find him. No? Maybe not. Maybe you haven't seen that one. And then there's Star Trek 6. You've seen that one with the Klingons where they kill...
Don't give everything away.
Well, I'm not gonna.
So
give
what you
everything
have
away.
promised me is that there's a ton of psychology.
There's a lot
films.
of good stuff that I think you're gonna really like when you're watching this movie or these movies from the perspective of a psychologist.
Gotcha. But there's no guarantee, right? We still need the folks to vote. So
That is correct.
One option is Star Trek, the first 6 original films.
Yeah.
The second choice is going to be
Harley Quinn, the animated series on HBO Max, the first season.
Mm-hmm.
So that is another choice that folks on Discord.
very highly acclaimed,
Mm-hmm.
really loved,
Very
an
funny. It's a
incredible following.
very funny show. You wouldn't think that it would be psychologically driven, but it turns out there's actually a lot that you can cover.
Right, and look, the main character is a mental health provider.
Yeah. Or was.
Yeah. So there's something to that, and I think we've seen most of all of season 1.
Yeah.
So
It's been a little while, so I'm looking forward to going back to it at some
Sure.
point if our voters decide. And then the third choice was what?
X-Men, the animated series,
Season 1.
season 1 from the early 90s.
Yeah.
So that would bring us back to our original mission in a way. Our original mission was Batman the Animated Series from the
Sure.
early 90s. This would be its cousin, right?
Yeah.
What Marvel was doing in the 90s with animation. Look, I've seen, I don't know, it's been years, but I think I've seen maybe nearly all of these episodes of the entire series.
Really?
It's, yeah, in the past, yes.
Yeah.
But as you know, my brain tends to squeeze out
Jettison
a lot of
everything a week after you saw it.
Right, I got to make room for other things. So I don't tend to recall and retain everything, especially from what I've seen growing up. But many moments do stand out. Many characters do stand out. I know this is yet another beloved show. Eric and Julia are colleagues and friends of ours, and I know that they are absolutely, also beloved and have done fantastic things, not just with the original show, but with a book and with bringing the community together.
Yeah.
Decades after the show. So I know that there's a community here who would love to hear us talk about X-Men, the animated series.
And because they were so closely related, unlike Batman, the animated series, because X-Men was so closely related to the comic books, and they were basically, there were entire arcs where they would just do, the old the comic book versions. They were animated adaptations before they were doing adaptations of comics. So that would be really super exciting as well.
Well, look, my job is not to sway or influence the vote.
Yeah, that's why we're excited about all three of them.
Right. I would be super happy with any of these choices.
Yeah.
And these are all fandoms and genres that we love and celebrate. Obviously, animation is an art and is a type of storytelling that we have loved since we started this podcast. So that would be yet, another celebration of psychology in comics. And live action Star Trek is also pretty fun.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. So, Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can find the poll that will be going from the point that you're hearing this episode for a week. We will be running it for 1 week. Where can they find it?
Well, they can find it on Patreon.
Yes.
So look for us, the Arkham Sessions, on Patreon.
Yeah.
You will find the poll there. We will be super excited to hear and learn what people want us to cover next.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not already on the Discord, by the way, this is how we narrowed down the shows to these three. So if you're wondering, how did we get here? How did we land here? Join our Discord. That's where the conversations are happening. That's where the nominations go up. These were not random. In other words, people were contributing to this vote. And check us out there.
Amazing. Drea, what did you think of WonderCon this year?
I will always say that WonderCon is my favorite comic convention.
Really?
Actually, my favorite popular arts convention in general.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that it's not as overwhelming as Comic-Con. It's not as crowded as Comic-Con. It's manageable, especially for someone who's never gone to a comic convention or popular arts convention. I'll say, hey, go to WonderCon. It's accessible.
Yeah.
And it continues to be my favorite show. There's a ton of cosplay. It's very family friendly. It's very educational. There's intellectual and academic tracks that you can follow in terms of panels. There's something to see every day. You don't have to wait in long lines to see things. Yeah. So it's, maybe the Funko booth.
Oh, yes.
I noticed that
was wild.
The Funko booth is slowly taking over the show, because every year it just becomes more massive and it's
harder to get in and get things and do things, but they've also made it a big spectacle. So it's like this year it was a big circus tent theme. You would go in through the circus.
Yeah, and look, they're not wrong. They are clowning. Like, let's be real.
Yeah.
The way that they're setting this up, it's really hard to get in. There's long lines. When you get past all they don't show you what's in there. They cover it up with barriers and things, so you think there's something spectacular back there. And it's just a bunch of Funko Pop toys, which is fine if you're a collector. Maybe you're looking for something exclusive, but it's just become so unavailable and inaccessible. And so when I say they're clowning, I really do mean it. Like, I'm just tired of it.
Well, they also had, I do know that there's I guess maybe they're owned by the same company, or they are, I don't know, but part of their booth also appeared to be Loungefly. They had like 6 or 7 new Loungefly bags, and I know you really like Loungefly. Those looked kind of interesting. But yeah, I think that this year's WonderCon, I don't think we're quite back to my level of love of WonderCon yet. I didn't see anything on the floor that I absolutely needed to have. It may have been the cheapest convention I've ever attended. In that I didn't come away with no money in my wallet. You know,
Okay.
like I didn't really buy much of anything. We did buy some amazing fleece sweatshirts from our good friend Tony Kim over at Hero Within. A great sort of geeky clothing line. They had some really awesome Star Trek fleeces that were specifically devoted to this third season of Star Trek Picard, which stars our good friend Todd Stashwick. So we were very excited about those. But other than that, there was nothing that I needed to walk away with. And so I'm looking forward to seeing WonderCon build up again as more and more companies start to show up after, post pandemic.
Right. And I think, to kind of close this out, we don't know which shows are going to survive in the long run. We do know that some shows have been canceled.
Yeah.
The popularity and the interest in in-person popular arts, gaming, and comics conventions, we'll see what will happen.
Yeah.
Some are thriving, some are not doing so well. Some of the bigger sponsors and companies are pulling out of those shows. I know this is a place where a lot of our community members, whether you're a fan, you're a geek, you're a nerd, you're a gamer, however you define yourself, these are the spaces where we feel welcomed, we feel included, we can find other individuals like us, we can find communities where we feel very affirmed and seen. So I feel like the importance of these shows is just still clear for me.
Yeah.
Yet I do wonder how sustainable some of these shows are going to be over time. So let's revisit. Of course, there are a couple more shows we're going to be at. We're going to be at Comic-Con Revolution. Yep. And Comic-Con Revolution is very close to us here in SoCal, so Ontario, California, and of course Comic-Con International, which most people know as Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Or San Diego Comic-Con,
yeah,
which is in just a few months. So we'll have to compare and share out our experiences at those shows.
Let's tell the good folks about our panel. How excited were you to do a panel looking back at the 30th anniversary of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, the one and only animated feature film from the writers and creators and directors of Batman the Animated Series, once again starring Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill was in there, Dana Delaney is in there. We had a couple of very special guests join us. There was the co-creator of the series and co-director of the movie, Eric Radomski, joined us. And then our dear friend, Ashley Victoria Robinson from Geek History Lesson. She's also a comic book writer herself. Also joined us. How did you feel about our panel that folks are going to listen to now?
A very delightful conversation. One that I will always treasure and remember. For one, we all took a moment to talk about missing the late, great Kevin Conroy and acknowledging all of his contributions to...
as well as Michael Reeves, who just passed away last week.
Right. And Eric Radomski was very fun to hang out with and to do a panel with. I'd never met him in person. So I was so delighted to hear his thoughts and feelings about the production of the film, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, but also to kind of hear some of his regrets and some sharing out, some very honest sharing out about what he would have liked to do with the film and some of the different but very real barriers and politics of making an animation or an animated film about Batman back in the 90s. So it was just a great joy to be able to not just have insight into those conversations, but to be a part of the conversation. Yeah. I may have teared up at the end during your last question when you asked whether the film stood the test of time. And I thought back on why I felt the film is definitely watchable. And, I'll say it again. If you haven't seen it or you haven't seen it in a long time, go and check it out. Go watch it.
Yeah. I loved the panel. I'm looking forward to hearing what our listeners who weren't able to attend, and there were actually several listeners, longtime listeners, who did attend, and they were great to talk to afterward. I'm looking forward to hearing what other listeners have to say about this panel. So without further ado, here is the WonderCon 2023 Arkham Sessions panel on the 30th anniversary of Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Feels like a Sunday, doesn't it? Everybody's just, it's 12:30 on a Sunday. We made it though. We have survived. Hopefully everybody's gotten everything they want, or at least know exactly where to go get it downstairs after the panel. Appreciate everybody deciding to come hang out with us on your Sunday afternoon. I see no reason why we can't just go ahead and get started. We've got a couple minutes early. It'll be a couple minutes longer panel. My name is Brian Ward. I am the co-host of a podcast called The Arkham Sessions. We started out by analyzing every episode of Batman the Animated Series through the very clinical lens of a psychologist. With me is that psychologist. She is my co-host. She is also a psychologist at UCLA. She has been written into canon by Gail Simone as Batgirl's therapist. She can be seen in any number of bonus features from Warner Brothers. Just about all of their animated movies, they know to come to her for psychological science, including coming up, there's the bonus feature for the new animated film, Batman, The Doom That Came to Gotham. You can see her in that. This is Dr. Drea Letamendi.
Hello. Good to see everybody. Happy WonderCon.
Also joining us is co-host of one of my all-time favorite podcasts, Geek History Lesson. She is Ashley Victoria Robinson.
I don't have any skills or qualifications.
Not true.
I'm just here to whine about how Robin isn't in this movie.
And then our very special guest this year. He is one of the co-creators of Batman the Animated Series, chiefly responsible for the look of the show and the movie, Mask of the Phantasm. He's also the co-director of Mask of the Phantasm. He is Mr. Eric Radomski. We were supposed to have one other panelist from History of the Batman, London Jackson. Unfortunately, this morning she was unable to attend, but she did send a couple of quick messages. One, she says, "I'm terribly sorry that I couldn't make it to this amazing panel to celebrate Batman with all Gothamites in attendance. Mask of the Phantasm is perhaps one of the best Batman films that explores the man, the mask, and the city he inhabits so timelessly. It can always be enjoyed and appreciated." Also, to Mr. Radomski in particular, she is sad that she couldn't meet and talk with you today. She wanted you to know that she wanted to thank you for helping bring to life the film and the classic DC animated universe. Your work on Batman the Animated Series universe propelled her into getting into comics years ago and kickstarted her fandom, and she'll always be thankful for your talent. But we did lose a couple of people that are key to this series. Just a few days ago, Mr. Michael Reeves passed, story editor. Eric, I would love to ask you, how instrumental was Mr. Reeves to the legacy of Batman the Animated Series?
Very much there as long as we were. As the team was assembled, Alan Burnett, Paul Dini were the first couple of our hardcore writers, and then a cavalcade came from there, but Michael was on from very much the beginning throughout the series and then on to the movie. Much like the directors, it was split amongst several participants from the series that contributed to making Mask of the Phantasm. So, of course, sadly missed as long as the next person you're going to mention, who passed not so long ago. And it's hard to believe it's been that long, long enough for people to get to the point where they're leaving us. So forever grateful, and again, his work lives on beyond him, so we're very grateful.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we'd be mistaken if we didn't mention Kevin Conroy, who left us this past year as well. To most, he is the quintessential Batman. And I just wanted to ask, starting down here with Drea, because I know how important this series in particular was to you and your career. Talk about what Kevin meant to you.
I don't think I'm alone to share that Batman the Animated Series and this version of Batman, Kevin Conroy's Batman, influenced and impacted so many of us. For me personally, this Batman was so deep, so emotional, so dynamic in terms of psychology that this series and this film is what propelled me into behavioral science. And it's not an exaggeration to say Batman the Animated Series influenced me to become a psychologist and to go into the field of behavioral science. So I think losing Kevin, it felt so unexpected and early. And, I know that he was such a legacy, an icon for many people. I almost want to say he raised many of us in our fandom. So it's such a tragedy, but also I know he'll be with us for the rest of our lives.
What you're saying is we are all his ward.
Yes.
Actually, what about you? What did Kevin bring to this role that was so important to you?
Well, one, this is a weird association, and I'm sure Drea's going to be analyzing me as I say it. My father's name was also Kevin, and he passed a lot more years ago. So he's always had kind of a weird dad quality for me personally, just with the name association. It was so lovely to get to see Kevin get to embody Bruce Wayne in live action when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths, because animation, thank you, doesn't always get the veneration that it deserves, and I think that really cemented his legacy in the larger DC universe. But I am also an award-losing, all-ages comic book writer, and when we sit down and script out our stories, we are always looking back at Batman the Animated Series and then the adventure comic books that tie it back in for the type of quality of storytelling. So to say what Kevin Conroy and this show and this film means to me, it creeps into so many strange parts of my life.
And then, Eric, what do you think Kevin brought to this role that made everyone embrace him so?
Well, it was the authentic approach to it. He's said it many times in interviews that he had not really done voiceover, especially for an animated series, prior to coming to the Batman auditions. And he came at it as just purely as a consummate actor, and took the role as serious as anything else. And as it was described, we knew him when we heard him, because we had heard several before. Several is an understatement. And he just, not only the quality of the voice, but there was passion and there was sincerity to his performance. And that not only sold us from the beginning, but I think as he became a fan of the art, he applied everything that he had brought as an artist to it. He never looked at it as just a job, and he always described it as Shakespearean. And that authenticity came through in the performances. So the fact that the stories were written in a way and always went back to the source material to be authentic, to bring a performance like that, it's not something you could predict. It's something you would love to say that you planned, but it was just sort of this wonderful marriage of a true artist coming for the first time to a new medium and applying his pure art to it. And we're all the better for it, all of us that were part of it and enjoyed it. And it just speaks to the fact that it is the magic of animation, where it's a disembodied voice combined with a bunch of artwork and some storytelling, and suddenly we're watching, a 2D animated show and we're believing every minute of it. So that speaks to his, his not only his true artsmanship, but also the passion and the sincerity to the role. Because at the end of the day, it could be just a job, and that's fine too. But this was something I think, had he experience in other roles prior might have put barriers up and rules, and he did none of that. He literally just came in, spoke from the script, and performed it the way that he thought it should be, and he blew everyone away. So it was a privilege and an honor to work with him. But again, when we met him, he was just another actor. Kevin Conroy coming in to audition for a part. So pretty great.
That's fantastic. I want to ask the fans on the stage, what does Batman the Animated Series, and specifically Mask of the Phantasm, mean to you 30 years later?
It's the best Batman movie ever made, and nothing else has ever touched it. So to say that it's like the pinnacle of my Batman fandom from a filmic perspective is not hyperbolic, but I watched this last night. I've watched this movie on the big screen at the Egyptian. I was too young. My parents thought it was too scary to watch when it first came out. But I've seen it so many times and I never get sick of it, and there's always more to explore. And then the legacy that it leaves, not only for Batman the Animated Series, but a lot of Batman projects going forward and the rest of the DC animated universe at this time with some of the casting choices that will carry on, is just so incredible. It's almost unfathomable in a way.
It really continues to stand out and make sense even after 3 decades. If you haven't seen it lately, watch it again. It really does stand the test of time. In terms of character development, of course, the drama that unfolds, it's almost like a Batman soap opera. It's potentially available psychologically for youngsters. I saw it when I was a kid for the first time, but as an adult now, I think I appreciate it for very different reasons. And so it really does have layers to it that I think could be the reason why it's so timeless in terms of its psychology, and why I find it to be such an excellent piece of art is that the questions that come up, this goes along with Kevin Conroy's performance, the vulnerability of our protagonist and the internal conflict, the questions that are raised about essentially what are we supposed to be doing with our lives, is such a deep question for a cartoon, right? And I think that's what elevates it to the point where all of us can sit with it and really begin to kind of take that in within our own insights and our own sense of self. And the fact that it's with a character that is so beloved, a character that many of us have grown up with and are attached to, we really are with that story. We're able to sit with that story and endure through the drama. And I know we'll probably talk about how everything ends, but it can be a very heavy film to sit with.
And I want to stress, for those that don't know, you credit Batman the Animated Series for your interest in becoming a psychologist. We've told Alan and Paul this. We've told Lauren Lester this on panels. Now we get to tell Eric.
Yep.
You genuinely credit Batman the Animated Series as your gateway to psychology.
Well, Batman the Animated Series is a stewardship into trying to understand people's behaviors, especially people who do not, look, act, seem like us. There's this respect for otherness. There's an understanding that if we can really do that detective work, we can truly begin to understand the origins of people's faults, the origins of their despair, and the choices that they make, their motivation. And while other superhero stories can get there, really the animated series was one of the first that delved into the deeper dynamic of many of its characters.
Eric, for people who aren't familiar, I would love for you to describe the role of a director in animation, because I know a lot of people instantly, when they think film director, they think someone on an 8x10 talking to an actor, usually pointing or doing a gesture like this. They've got a big coat and a ball cap. Your job is ever so slightly different than that. Please describe for someone the difference between an animation director.
Sure. Well, director title in general is such a specific and yet it's so understated in terms of the scope of responsibility, and animation only compounds that. And anyone who claims to be an animation director will have come up through the ranks. You don't step into a studio and just become the director. You really have to understand the process, and from a technical standpoint, I'm talking about actually making the film. So your duties are knowing how it's made and how to fix problems as they come, and being able to be true and honor the script that you've been given to to bring to life, essentially. But it's much broader and much more deep than just having an idea or a perspective on something. You've got to be able to execute, and that's the part that often gets missed. A lot of folks love to wear that hat, and yet when it comes down to it, in the case of Batman, and I've held this all along, since I've worked on it, and thank goodness for all the success and all the fans that love it. But truth be told, we were working on really slim budgets, and it was a crack pace, schedule to get things done. We had some influence from the outside in terms of networks, and obviously we're working on a IP that had existed for 60 years before we got into it. So you've got all of those things weigh into what the director has to deal with, and a lot of it can be a distraction, and you're still trying to get the job done on time and within your budget parameters. So a director's got to be fairly diverse, not only have good ideas, be able to fix problems as they come up, but you have to be tolerant of a lot of influence and a lot of input. And then, the gravy of it all, and I say it on every production I'm on, the production is the easiest part, because you're dealing with so many personalities and so many influences, and you want to do justice to the story you're telling, and that's ultimately the director's job, is to preserve the integrity of that story as much as you can. So, the other end of this that throw out to all the folks that are fans in any animation you watch, be careful before you start criticizing a lot of different shows that come out, and it's easy to just see something and dismiss it, but remember that it went through tons of hands under incredible scenarios that you have no idea what they might have been, and a lot of folks that work in this industry don't choose to spend 80 hours a week for months on end to put something out there for people to immediately dismiss it and say, "Oh, that's a piece of crap." Like,
what?
That's and it happens. So I'm getting into the weeds with the director of it all, but the director has all those things to consider, and at the end of the day, you hope you have enough time within dealing with all those other things that are swirling around the production to be able to focus and tell a story that's not only compelling, but that people could allow themselves to believe, and that's it's a tall task. It's a heck of a lot of work, and when it works well, we sit here 30 years later and talk about it. So we're very fortunate to be part of that team.
I want to ask you, again, as a director, how much does psychology play into your job, whether directly or indirectly? How much are you thinking about the characters and making them three-dimensional for a 2D medium?
Yeah, in the case of Batman, it was a unique scenario, obviously. The best thing that could have happened was, believe it or not, in the beginning when Bruce and I started, no one paid attention, which was fantastic for us, because we were a growing studio at the time, and there were a lot of other things that were being, important things that were needed attending. So as we started out, it was just the two of us kicking things around. Alan Burnett came on shortly after and gave a little bit more, organization to the storytelling part of it. But the reason I bring that up is to your point about how much do you put into the psychology of the characters and exploring that. Again, it's a luxury, especially with television animation, because the schedules are so incredibly tight. The budgets are very tight, so you want to do justice, and at the same time, you've got a couple of weeks. It's like, so the good thing for us on this project in particular were most of the folks that we had as part of the team, were fans of not only the character, but of the source material. So we're familiar enough with, even though, a lot of directors, writers would have their own perspective on or take on some of the characters, the core material was always consistent. And I think everyone had the same intention in mind to preserve that. Some other shows don't have that luxury of, the history to build on, especially brand new shows, because you're creating that psychology. So as much as you want to apply that, and you need to apply that in order to give integrity and believability to the characters, you don't always have time to. So again, a little bit in the weeds, but to Ashley's point about being her favorite movie, for me, it's sacrilege for me to say it. I made this movie, but it never really was a movie. It was essentially going to be not only direct to video, but it was in our term, coming off of 65 half-hour episodes. It was a couple episodes laced together. We had a little bit more time, and it was going to be a direct to video. So we didn't. Even at that, we could embellish a little bit. Not until it was in the middle of production did they tell us it was going to go on the big screen, and that was to my absolute horror, as opposed to thinking, oh, it's a movie. It's like, no, this is a really bad idea. And Godsmack that so many fans love this as much as they do, and I'm again grateful for it. I see the quality in what we were able to do, and the pure joy and appreciation for what we were able to accomplish, but it's hard for me to say it's a film, because I feel kind of ripped off, because any other animated film, any other film that you would consider an animated film, has a minimum of 2 years of a production schedule.
Right.
We had under a year. And even though we had built the art direction from the series, this was a whole different monster. And it was just sort of laid in our lap and said, go and get it done, and we're going to put it on the screen. And it was not the perfect scenario to make a movie, and with that, doesn't matter now, but it would have been twice as good had we given just the time and the money to do it better. We didn't need any more input. We didn't need the no disrespect to Pixar, Disney, we didn't need months and months of thinking and rethinking and putting the story up and tearing the story down. We were confident with what we had. We just didn't have enough time to do it as well as it should have been done, and it deserved to be done. So the fact that it came out as good as it did, and the fans were so generous to accept it for what it was and embrace it because they were all in, that's what made the success of this film. There's no doubt about it. So
I'm curious to ask if there was something you had wanted to do with the film had you more time.
Oh, absolutely, and a lot of it would have been truly taken advantage of the things that everyone seems to react to. The not only exploration of the characters, but even the way that things were shot and staged. We could have made more of it, and it would have been, again, more of an honor to the quality of the story that we were telling, and we did a pretty good job with that. But as any artist, anyone who creates in any capacity, you always want to do it better. You always know that it could have been better, and all the things that jump in front of it to cause you to have to make decisions and just move forward. So from a true film making perspective, it would have had a lot more quality in terms of camera choice and execution of the environment, and even the way the Phantasm was presented. We would have, I know for myself, I would have liked to have kept it even more mysterious and more in the shadows, but again, it just was, we just didn't have the time, and but it plays, and what do I know in terms of everybody loves it, so thank you for that. But
and to your credit, though, famously, if you can find this on YouTube, Siskel and Ebert even apologized for not having reviewed it when it was in theaters because they didn't know that it was there. And then on video, they said, this is the best Batman movie we've seen.
Yeah.
And so even if I realize that that there's always something that the artist would want to have done differently. But you got two guys who aren't particularly known for being won over all that easily. Both raving over this film and then making it their pick of the week for VHS. It was pretty incredible. Part of what made this movie so fantastic was just the depth of character. It's one of the first times that we've ever seen a genuinely vulnerable Bruce Wayne. Mm-hmm. We've seen countless iterations of him on his knees with his parents and pearls strung across the ground. But this is the first time we've ever seen him going to their tombstone and asking to be let out of his promise to even be Batman before he'd even gotten started. Dre, I want to ask you about this because you've talked on our podcast many times about there being sort of a trifecta to Batman. There's Bruce, and then there's the Playboy Bruce Wayne, who we see at the beginning of this film very clearly, and he's very much not the same character who's on his knees at the tombstone. And then he's not really the character under the cowl. So talk a little bit about that and Batman in this film.
What I appreciate about this film is that there is a significant amount of time that we spend with Bruce. We get to know about his vulnerabilities and the tension that he's living with in regards to what he feels he needs to do to resolve the grief that he's experiencing, and then the things that he feels he could do, the sort of the possibilities in his life, in this case of having a healthy romantic relationship, perhaps a family, and put down the cowl and cape. This concept that it's at a point where he can't integrate those things into his life, is a really sophisticated question to ask in a film like this, but it really works. I've thought about Batman for decades, but I think in terms of the trifecta, the sort of dimensions of his personality, I don't think he has any kind of multiple personality disorder or something like that, but he's able to kind of compartmentalize the public persona that is Bruce Wayne, of course, the shadow of Batman, which a lot of times pulls him in. A lot of times he gets lost in. A lot of times he's quite vulnerable to. And then who we might consider a more authentic, integrated person, which I just simply call Bruce, a very familiar name. And what we all want for ourselves is an integration of all these desires and wishes and goals. And what he's dealing with, of course, is the conflict of what do I do with these different obligations. One might even compare this to like a super ego and id. How do I live with these various layers of the self? And in this film we see a quite socially busy Bruce Wayne, with women falling over him and showing interest in not just dating him but in marrying him, and this sort of refusal publicly to be in relationships, but also this interest in being standoffish. He does not want people to be close to him. And then what we have is, unfortunately for him, really just one close relationship, which is Alfred in this movie. It's just Alfred. And the introduction of, or the reintroduction of this love interest reignites and allows him to remember these different feelings that he knew were available to him. And so, all these things are very sophisticated, mature themes around the self and the development of the self. But what I think really draws me to this film over and over again, and I think was probably core to the development of this film, was the story of traumatic grief. How do we deal with long-lasting feelings of loss and anguish and despair related to the death, in this case, the death of his parents, in the Phantasm's case, destruction of her life. And we see the pursuit of vengeance. We see these desires to act out on these urges to find closure. And the questions come up about, whether all of this is worth it. And I think, again, those are very common developmental human questions that we all deal with too.
I want to ask about that relationship that you're bringing up. This is the first time that we've ever seen anyone make Bruce question whether he should even go out and pummel the criminals to begin with. Maybe he can have a healthy life. He chooses to pursue this relationship, and then he's sort of unexpectedly ditched one night when she has to skip town, which then pushes him into becoming vengeance in the night. Because up to that point, he wasn't even Batman yet. He was just a dude wearing a black outfit and, stopping some people taking things off of trucks. But so I want to ask about the power of this relationship. Ashley, what do you think about Andrea Beaumont and this sway that she has on Bruce, really even in the present day? I mean, there are moments where he starts to say to Alfred, I don't know, maybe this could work.
Should have put a ring on it. That's my thought about it. No, she is such an incredible character in all facets and all complexities, because she's kind of like a dark mirror to Batman and Bruce, which is wild because Batman and Bruce are already a very dark mirror on humanity and on all of us. If you've ever fallen head over heels in love with someone, even if your relationship with them has ended, you often want to make huge changes in your lives for them. And if your secret is not like, I got a lot of long boxes in my closet, it's that, I was hanging out with Ra's al Ghul and I go and beat the snot out of people who probably need to just go to rehab. That can be a harder thing, I think, to grapple with. And I think that's why, if you start watching this movie when you're 5 and then you watch it when you're 15, 25, 35, 45, hopefully we're all watching it when we're 105. I think that's why it still resonates. I'm not as smart to know maybe why that would be and why that's as aspirational in all of us, but I live my life hoping that we get to see Andrea make another big screen appearance. Even though, spoiler alert about the end of the movie.
Well, and at the end, so that actually brings up an interesting question that we've had when we discussed this film on our podcast before. One of our friends, Livio Remendelli, asked if, because the two of them, Batman's mission is sort of abstract. He just wants to beat up crime. She was going after very particular people. Had she completed her mission prior to Bruce finding out, and then Batman finding out, do you think this is a woman who could have led a happy life with Bruce there in Gotham, if she had completed her mission, unlike Bruce has ever been able to do?
I think there's only 3 women that Bruce has ever interacted with where he could have had an actual relationship with. I think it's Silver St. Cloud, Selena Kyle, and Andrea Beaumont. And Andrea's my favorite choice among the 3.
I'm curious to hear what Eric's thoughts are for sure on this. I feel an obligation to talk about the science of closure when we pursue maybe or fulfill the urges we have around revenge. And there's a tremendous amount of literature that actually shows that there is little that's actually fulfilling in the long term when we pursue these more extreme, especially aggressive or violent related end results because we feel wronged or we feel something was unjust or unfair. Going back to traumatic grief, the reason why traumatic grief is so important to explore and think about, especially if we're pulling from entertainment media or the popular arts, something that we can really gain from this is that, yes, those feelings make a lot of sense to us. We feel angry, we feel rageful, we have the urges and impulses to go after the people that have wronged us. And the definition of traumatic grief is when the loss or the trauma specifically feels unjust, or it feels sudden and unexpected. There's something unfair about it, and we feel we must do something to correct that. And so what Andrea Beaumont is doing is somewhat relatable. It has this essence of fairness to it, and I think that's what makes her such a cool character. And yet the reality is, typically, even when we fulfill some of those wishes, that actually does not resolve the internal despair, the anguish that we might be experiencing at a deeper level. And so that has to be explored and reflected. Typically, a loving, healthy relationship that might be available to her would be a more likely source of repair.
Speaking of Andrea and the hold that she has, even right up to the end, spoiler, Batman's Batman. She just, in a cloud of smoke, just kind of hugs the Joker and pulls him away. And we've talked about how much Batman and the Joker need each other in this city.